Dr. Trevor Cottrell bringing you another lecture in the Strength Lecture Series. So I get asked many times by young interns and young students about career potential in strength conditioning or human performance training. And they often want advice as to how to build their career in strength conditioning or how to move into that career. And it's a tricky conversation because there's no one easy way. It's not like you just graduate, get a degree, and apply for an ad and get the job. It's not many of those that exist. It takes a long time to build your career and become really good at this profession. It's often described it's like doing a lot of other skilled trades, whether you're in cabinet making or pipe fitting, or you may be in other skilled trades like physical therapy, occupational therapy, chiropractic. It's something that takes a while for you to actually build your abilities. So this lecture here will talk about how to get there, the things you have to do, the highlights and lowlights of being a strength coach, and hopefully will guide some new interns and young students into the profession, or perhaps even away from the profession if they don't see it's a good fit. You'd hate to spend 8-10 years trying to get into this profession and then realize that it's just not for you. So you want to be a strength coach, do you? So first of all, you got to look like a strength coach, I guess. There was a time when I was younger and you went to a strength conditioning conference and everybody had a bald head and everybody had a goatee. That was kind of the look you had to have. It gave you street cred. Well, we've moved away from that a little bit, but you still get a lot of that street cred that will help you get into the profession. Not essentially necessary, but just so you know, there are some biases out there. And some kids want to see the big meatheads that are actually teaching them how to lift weights. But you can overcome that through good coaching skill, obviously. So let me tell you, though, this profession, it is not for the lifestyles of the rich and famous TV show. Let me tell you. It is very, very long hours, oftentimes, in many settings, in private and in university school settings. You have to work usually several years before you move into a good, steady, paid position with some stability, if there is such a thing. And every now and again, some new undergrads may luck into a position, but that's more the rarity. And even when you get into these positions, the pay is pretty modest. In Canada, you're doing pretty good to make 50, 55 Gs. In the U.S., you're doing pretty good to make 40 to 45,000 as an entry-level position. That's not too bad. There are a few high-end jobs now. You know, there's strength conditioning coaches at Division 1A schools who are making $500,000 a year, but there's literally counted on your hands how many people get those jobs. It's very, very few. Nonetheless, the profession's come a long way since when I was a kid. And there are more and more jobs that are coming available in Canada and the U.S., and they can be rewarding jobs. The other problem with this career path for some people is you got to be prepared to move around, especially if you're in the U.S., in the school systems. Average life expectancy for a strength coach at a given institution is about 1.5 years. Usually there's a turnover every 3 years. Some schools, you have a strength coach that's been institutionalized and they've been there a long time. That's more of a rarity and more these days. So you have to be prepared to move around, not only when you're actually doing it as a career, but when you're actually developing your career. So when you're learning and interning, you have to be prepared to go across the country or go south or north, right? Because that's what you have to do to learn and to find the positions you want to be in. And then probably one of the more aggravating sides of the job is you're at the mercy of other coaches. As a strength conditioning coach, you'll do undergraduate education in the industry, field of topic, say a health sciences topic. You'll often do a master's degree in an exercise science related topic. You'll do 3 to 5 years interning. You'll go to conferences, take courses, write certifications, and you'll spend a lot of time developing your professional acumen. And then you go into these settings where you have a coach that may or may not even have an undergraduate degree on something completely unrelated to coaching or anything, and they've just kind of hung out on the field or out on the court, and they were a good player once, and all of a sudden they're in charge. They seem to oftentimes think that they know what's best for their athletes as far as training, conditioning, and human performance. And oftentimes you're at the mercy of these individuals. And the same goes true for national sporting organizations and clubs, amateur, pro, all those kinds of things. You're always at the mercy of other individuals who are not very educated in your realm, who are trying to direct what you do as a career. That's probably the most frustrating thing, honestly, in this career. So it sounds pretty depressing, doesn't it? Well, you know what? There's some pretty cool sides to it. It is a pretty fun job. If you like this kind of thing, if this is what you're into, nothing more exciting than being in the weight room with athletes who are training hard and going after it. And you can sculpt individuals. You can make timid little skinny wimps into monstrous beasts who can perform at a level that they never thought they could perform at. And this goes for male and for female. If you can capture a young child, 10, 11, 12 years old, and train them properly through puberty and into their adulthood, their athletic ability is just phenomenal. And you can just see them grow and their potential grow and their abilities grow, and that's very rewarding. It's nice being able to tell someone with confidence, I can change your athletic performance. I can enhance your athletic performance. I can grow you into this monster, this freaky performing animal. And then watching that transpire. That's really cool. And not only that, but even a more recreational setting, taking a person who's experienced periods of pain or lack of performance or inability to do things, and all of a sudden they can do things again. Sometimes you may be working with a 60 or 70-year-old person who just wants to be able to go out and run a 5K again, and they haven't been able to barely sit down and out of a chair, and then by training them, all of a sudden they can do these things and more. All of a sudden they can roof their house again. They can carry the groceries in. So just being able to transform people's lives in this way, and that's pretty fun. And it's pretty impactful, and you can make a really big difference for a lot of individuals and really change lives if you do it well. If you're in a good setting, these jobs, this is not boring. You're not catching naps halfway through the workday and looking up and down at the clock, hoping that you can punch that clock any minute now. You're on the go. Time will fly. You're having fun. You're involved in the weight room. You're cheering people on. You're thinking about things. You're having deep discussions, and shouldn't be boring. If you're bored in this industry, it probably means that you're just not that into it. You kind of like the idea of it, but you're just not really into coaching. You don't really want to transform lives. So if you find that as you start this that you're getting really bored, it's time to start looking at other options. Yeah, you don't get rich, but you can make a living wage. You can get by. It's what do you need, really? A little trailer under the bridge down by the river. That's you can live in that. And give it time. You can build your earning potential depending where you go. There's not a ton of six-figure jobs out there, but there's a lot of $60,000 to $80,000 jobs out there, which is quite livable in most communities. Maybe not some of the big centers, but most areas you could get by with that and almost raise a family even. The other neat thing about the career choice is you're always learning. There's lots of learning to do because, yes, you're a bit of an expert in strength conditioning and human performance, but you also have to delve into a lot of different realms. So physiological sciences, biomechanics, motor control and learning, anatomy, injury assessment, therapeutic exercise, nutrition and dietetics. There's coaching, management, leadership, business management. There's always ways to build on your career. There's always learning opportunities, and you can every day you're in the weight room, you can get better. Every person you interact with, you'll learn from, because each individual is slightly different in how they adapt. So that keeps it interesting. And generally in this field, the more effort you put into it, the more you're rewarded. So those people who work hard and self-educate are usually the ones that will move up in their careers and get the better jobs. So there is a hierarchy. It's not just a good old union job and you just wait and hopefully someone else retires and you take that position. Well, there's a bit of that in our industry, I guess, but it's there's an actual merit-based hiring that goes on. So if you work hard, you can get those better jobs. So that's why I think people do it anyway. So if you want to be a strength coach, what do you got to do to be successful? Well, there's a few things you should consider. Step number 1, become a master of technique. So many strength coaches, they kind of get what goes on in the weight room. They may spend a lot of time watching YouTube videos or reading about programming, but they may not actually know how to really coach technique or perform themselves the technique. You have to be able to, at the drop of a hat, in an instant, be able to see someone move, know what they're doing wrong, be able to provide correctives right away in order to get them on the right track or regress them if necessary. That's really critical in our industry, and a lot of coaches still aren't that good at that. So you have to take time. You got to do it yourself. You got to watch it. You got to think about it, and you got to develop your own systems for coaching technique that are efficient and effective in small group and large group settings. You have to know the science. Not every strength coach remembers their physiology from way back when. There's no doubt about that. A lot of strength coaches, if they wrote the CSCS exam today, would probably fail the theoretical portion. That being said, the better you know your science, the more control you have over the environment you're training in. The better conversations you can have with coaches and other parts of your performance team, whether it's a physiotherapist or a biomechanist or even a professor that may be involved on the side. If you know your science, you can call out BS when it occurs. You'll be able to think through and troubleshoot some of the new gadgets and gizmos that are on the market. You'll be able to make informed decisions. So it's always important to stay up on the science, whether it's physiology, biomechanics, motor control, injury, you name it, or human performance in general, so that you know best practices in the field. Then you're not an athletic therapist, you're not a physical therapist or physiotherapist, you're not a chiropractor, you're not an osteopath, you're a strength coach. However, you have to understand injury. What are mechanisms of injury? What are common injuries in given sports? How are injuries often assessed? Some very simplistic ways to assess certain common injuries. And then what does a rehabilitation plan include? How do you progress people through a rehabilitation plan? That's critical because athletes get hurt all the time, and you play a really, really important role in rehabilitating that athlete. In some settings, an athlete gets hurt, all of a sudden they stop going into the weight room and they just go to therapy and they work that injured limb and that's all they work, and then they completely detrain. That's not a good model. A good model is an athlete gets injured, you develop a rehabilitation plan for that injured limb, and then you also develop a rehabilitation plan for all the other uninjured portions of the body to maintain as much conditioning as possible in that individual. And then the strength coach is closely involved in returning that athlete back to their playing stature that they were before they were injured. So you have to understand injury. You have to understand approaches to injuries and some of the patience that you need towards that. Nutrition, as I said, with knowing the science and becoming an expert in a lot of different fields, you should be referring to a registered dietitian whenever possible. The problem is registered dietitians aren't always available, and you will be the go-to person people ask for nutrition advice. So you have to at least have some understanding of good nutrition, not just Muscle Magazine and internet versions of nutrition, but actual science of nutrition, common practices, not just the fad diet of the day. So be able to give easy advice, be able to ask an athlete, well, what did you eat today? And then give them advice based off that. Creating hydration strategies and post-workout recovery strategies. So you have to understand that area and learn more in that area. You personally have to work out. Not 100% of the time, but it sure helps if you exercise. Sure, looking a little jacked gives you street cred and makes kids listen to you a little bit more maybe, but you just have to know what it feels like. You have to know how to demonstrate. You have to understand what 5x5 feels like when you're above 85%. You can't write a program unless you've felt some of those things, because then you don't understand what your athletes are feeling. You don't know what is hard and what is easy, what's a lot, what's a little. So it's critical that you yourself train. If you don't train, and especially train at any decent intensity, you just won't have a good understanding of this career or your profession in total. Again, doesn't mean you have to do that all the time, but it sure is important to develop a good context for this. It also helps to compete too. compete in Olympic weightlifting, powerlifting, strongman, Highland Games, something like that. So again, you understand what it's like to have to really improve your performance using strength-related activities. And helps if also you were an athlete at some point, so you understand what's going through an athlete's mind as they're in playoff season and preseason and they're trying to qualify or try out for a team. So get out there and get your hands dirty is my advice to you. Networking. Strength conditioning is heavily reliant on networking. Usually before a job is posted, the person looking for that strength coach, trying to hire that strength coach, will call their friends who will then give them advice on who's available to hire. It's only if they absolutely have to post an ad that they will. Say if their school requires it by HR policy. But usually they don't even want to do that. They want to just hire someone they know that's good. I'll get calls all the time. Who's good? What do you know about this person? And so establishing a network, getting out there and meeting people, showing people that you are confident and that you're thinking and that you're putting in effort and energy, that's really important for building your career path. And then part of that is presenting and publishing. So not everybody's going to present at national meetings, but there's local meetings that you can present at, educational groups within your institution or your company. It could be just sports clubs down the road, a high school down the road. So practice presenting and getting information out there, or writing articles. Ideally, science-based articles, or even, blogging's a little bit overrated. Anybody can blog, but if you put out decent information that's useful for others that they can provide to their athletes or coaches or parents, then your name gets known a little bit. So whether you're using social media as an outlet or your own website, whatever it may be, it helps to get your name out there a little bit. And then teaching. That doesn't mean necessarily in the classroom, but teach others. Develop your own internship plan. Get young people working with you in your career. Coach people up, because through teaching you learn much better about your profession. You stop to ask yourself questions. Why am I teaching this? Do I really understand what I'm teaching? And no better way than to learn than to teach. So that's a long list. That's a lot of things you got to consider if you want to be a strength coach. So what are some good rules? A bit of repetition here, but here's some rules to follow. One, you have to understand that this stuff's complicated. It isn't complicated, but it's harder than you think. Getting strong is not complicated. You take someone who doesn't train and you train them with some load, they're going to get stronger. There's many ways you could do that. You could do high rep, you can do low rep. There's all kinds of things you can do. Some things are better than others, mind you. So it's not that complicated to get someone better in the weight room if you're letting them move properly and stressing with a bit of load. But it is more complicated than you think. Just because you spent time in a personal training setting doesn't mean you truly understand the intricacies of programming for a high-level athlete or a very low-level athlete or an athlete undergoing rehabilitation. So often, some coaches just bring out these cookie-cutter programs, or even worse, random programs, flavor-of-the-day programs, pulled-off YouTube programs, and that doesn't work. Short-term, sure, anybody will adapt. In the first 4 to 6 months, you can get people to adapt all kinds of ways. But if you have to develop this athlete over years, you better have a much more complex system than just go out and do P90X or something like that, or rehash those kinds of group fitness programs. So you have to understand that it isn't that complicated. You don't have to get too fancy. There's little new under the sun, but at the same time, there's a lot more to it than just writing some random program for a personal training client. Part of that, you have to understand that everything works and nothing works all the time. So in order for adaptation to occur, you got to stress, allow them to recover, give them a more difficult stress or a different stress, allow them to recover, give them more specific stress, allow them to recover. So you can't just do the same canned program over and over and over again. And I see this all the time, where the person in first year football team at the university is doing the same program as a person in fourth year, and every year they do that same program over and over again. The body, once it's adapted to a stressor, stops adapting to that stressor. So you have to reintroduce more difficult stressors in order to allow for ongoing adaptation. And there's some better ways to do that than others. Number 3, always be able to answer the question why. Why did you choose that warm-up? Why did you choose that exercise in the warm-up? Why, when you did that stretch, did you position the leg in that position and not a different position? Every single step you take in your programming, you should be able to explain why. If someone was to ask you, why did you do it this way? And it should have a good, logical, evidence-based basis for it, or experientially based reason for it. And a lot of coaches, unfortunately, the reason why, you ask them why, and they'll say, well, that's how I learned it, or that's what I saw someone else do, or I saw this on Instagram or YouTube. That is not a reason why. That's lazy, that's uneducated, that's taking shortcuts. So if you want to be a strength coach, you have to develop programming that's meaningful and that you can answer the question why. When it comes to the job, actually doing the job, number 4 says exceed expectations. So kids these days, always complain about kids these days. Well, it's not just this generation, but many generations in the past. Young people in general, they sometimes don't understand that they're competing against others, and that the best way to ensure their security is when asked to do something, they don't just do the minimum standard, they do the maximum standard and exceed that standard. So you go above and beyond what's expected. Unfortunately, sometimes that results in long hours and a lot of labor, and if you look at the wage per hour, it's not very good, but that's what you need to do. So if you think you understand what your employer or coach needs, if you think you understand that, take it one step beyond that need. How can I make it even better? How can I impress them even more? Because then when I get a phone call saying who's good, I'll be able to quickly pull out those individuals who have exceeded expectations, say these are the people you want. Part of that is number 5, and assume it is your job. So often young people in the industry say, well, my job is to do this one thing, and that's what I do. Picking up those pylons isn't my job. Putting away those power cords is not my job. And that's the wrong attitude. You have to be ready to do any job, anytime. If a kid vomits on the floor, you have to be ready to pull out that bucket and clean it up. If there's towels that need to be folded, that's your job too. Equipment's sweaty, wipe it down. Never assume that something's not your job. Always be willing to do what has to be done to get it done. Number 6, know when you're outranked. You'll often be coaching in team settings with multiple coaches involved. Understand the chain of command. Understand who's in charge. That doesn't mean you have to follow bad programming and be like a lemming and jump over the cliff. What that means is you have to understand that in certain situations there's a lead, and that person should be allowed to lead. And if you keep interjecting, it's not only irritating to the leader, it's confusing to the athlete. If there's issues of safety, obviously you can address those. But what you have to do is, if you're in a situation where you're unsure, or you have a question, or you feel a need to challenge them, you should find a way to do that with that lead individual so that it's not impinging on the actual coaching that's taking place. Sometimes it can be as simple as, hey coach, do you want me to take these two and fix their squat technique? Because the coach isn't seeing that they keep squatting poorly over and over again. And it's as simple as asking permission to do certain things. Can I do this, coach? And by doing that, then it's showing you respect that other individual, but you're also trying to do the right thing for the athletes and exceed expectation and taking on jobs that not everybody may think are yours. Part of that also is number 7, you got to be able to ask questions. So if you see something that's not clear, you may not want to call them out in front of everybody, but just pull them aside and say, ask the question, why? What are we trying to achieve here? What's the purpose of what we're doing? Can you explain to me why? I read something like this. You're doing something different. Why did you do something different? Nice casual conversation, not a confrontational conversation. Give them a chance to answer that, because sometimes experience has taught them a lot more than you'll get out of any book or YouTube video. Also related to this is number 8. Predict the needs of the environment you're in. Again, you're working in team environments, you're working with other coaches. Especially if there's a lead and you're not a lead, you have to predict, what do you think they need me to do next? So all of a sudden you just finish a diligent workout on the field and you're heading into the weight room. You should be thinking, okay, if I have some downtime, I'm going to pick up some of this agility equipment and put it away so we can transition faster. Or if I have a bit of downtime, I'm going to race into the weight room and make sure that the racks are all set up. So look ahead. Think about, okay, what are we about to do this morning? And take the initiative and get it done. And if you're not sure, ask, is it okay if I do this? If I set up these agility cones? Nothing worse than working with younger coaches who just stand there and expect to be told everything they need to do. That doesn't work short term, and long term, that will not lead to a career in this industry. And then last but not least, number 10, be the thermostat in the room, not the thermometer. So a thermometer tells you the temperature. It's hot in here. It's cold in here. The thermostat sets the temperature in the room. It walks in the room, and if it wants that room to be hot, it makes that room hot. If it wants that room to be cold, it makes that room cold. The attitude you put on in front of your athletes and other coaches will be mirrored by those athletes and other coaches. If you're a grumbly old bear all the time and negative, everybody around you will be negative towards you. If you're energetic, excited, enthusiastic, every time an athlete walks in, they will become excited and enthusiastic. Nothing worse than a 6 a.m. workout, rolling into a 6 a.m. workout with a team of 15 and the coach looks like he just rolled out of bed and hasn't even focused on what's going to happen that day. That is not setting the temperature in the room. If everybody walks in at 6 a.m. and you're, all right, guys, good morning, let's do this. This is going to be a blast. I have a whole lot of fun stuff for you. That's the kind of attitude you want to have. So there you go. There are some good rules to follow. I'm sure you could fill this in with more, but hey, this is getting long. All right, so now last step. Now you got to get athlete buy-in. A lot of these topics kind of overlap, but now you got to think about the relationship with the athlete themselves, and some of it relates to what I've already said. For example, being able to lift. So be able to demonstrate a full squat, or at least verbally talk through a partial demonstration. It really helps if you can teach a decent Olympic lift, or a decent kettlebell movement, or decent sprint technique, or skip technique, or agility technique. So be able to demonstrate. And that, how do you get like that? Well, you got to train, right? So that goes back to previous slides. The other thing, you have to understand, you don't have to take crap from anybody. People shouldn't be able to treat you like crap. If they do, you've lost the battle of being a coach. It's okay for them to joke with you. It's okay sometimes to do a disparaging joke about you in jest, because sometimes that's fun and that builds rapport and that's locker room talk. But if you're letting people talk back at you, put you down, challenge you all the time, you've lost that audience. Nobody respects you, and you have to change that. You have to figure out what's creating that environment. You have to sit down with people individually, one-on-one, see what is the issue here, why are you in this state, and correct it. Either means that you may have to approach the problem differently, or that athlete has to be removed, or they have to approach you differently. It helps athletes develop trust in you and not look negatively towards you if you can actually tell them why. Again, coming back to that why. Okay, guys, this is what we're going to do today. Have you done it before? Okay, this is why we're doing this. What I'm trying to achieve is. Or in this cycle of this program, what our goal is. I want you coming into the workout every day thinking about working towards that goal. So that lets them know that you've actually put some thought behind it, some effort behind it, and you're leading them in a certain direction that they can be invested in. Then be able to empathize with injury or pain. Always be aware. If you see an athlete nursing something, like they just finished a sprint and you see them maybe limp a little bit or kind of shake their leg or stretch their hamstring, be aware of that. Say, okay, what's up there? What happened? Oh, hamstring's really tight today, coach. Okay, well, let's back you off this. Let's work on this. Here, I'll give you, roll this out or call in the AT or whatever it may be. Empathize with them. But that doesn't mean that you just say, all right, go ride a bike for an hour. No, you can still train. If they have one little tweaked hamstring, they can still train really hard. It just means you don't train the hamstring hard that day, and you do other things for the hamstring. So empathize with them, but don't cave into them. Give them options. Okay, all right, your knees are bugging you again today? Okay, so let's work your posterior chain. Always have that option. And then, of course, the coaching 101, strength conditioning 101, the no technique. Have a regression and progression ready. Have systems of regression and progression. If your athlete's struggling, you see one rep done wrong. All right, let's see if they can fix it themselves. Second rep's done wrong. Okay, I got to intervene. Give them a couple cues. Third rep, still wrong? Okay, cues aren't working. Let's go regress. Let's take you back a step. Let's reteach this movement. So you have to be able to do that in a blink of an eye in a room with 10, 15, 20 people, sometimes even more. And if you have more than 20 people, you have to have systems that you can get a whole group working together and work regressions and progressions together and still ensure everybody gets a workout. So all of that, if an athlete sees you doing all these things, all of a sudden they believe in you. They think you've got it figured out. They aren't skeptical according to you. Because unfortunately in this industry, there's a lot of snake oil salesmen. There's a lot of people selling gadgets and gizmos and quick talk. And people have become very wary of that. So if you show confidence in the ability to do these things that I just described to you, you will get that athlete buy-in. Okay, so do you still want to be a strength coach? Obviously, it's a tough career choice. It is not an easy ride, folks, in the U.S. or in Canada. In the U.S., you're bouncing around school to school. You may bounce from private to academic several times in your career. You may move all over the place, and that's not an easy life for a lot of people. In Canada, there's not even that many schools that have a full-time strength coach. As far as universities, there's very few high schools as well. So there's just not that many jobs out there. So you spend 4 years in an undergraduate degree, you may do a 2-year master's, you do 3 to 5 years internshiping, paid or unpaid, and then maybe you might get a decent job at $50,000, maybe with a sports institute or something like that. So, it's tough. And then you get into these situations and you're surrounded by other individuals who have no idea why you're there. A cycling coach or a rowing coach or a basketball coach who has no clue what the role of a strength conditioning coach is in affecting their athlete's performance. So it's frustrating. It's a tough industry. But if this is what you want to do, you have to develop a learning path. You have to figure out, what do I need to do to be good at this job? Find mentors, look at educational streams, and create a path where when you're done that, you will be marketable. And it'll be people look at your resume or CV and say, this person is someone that we could hire. Then, at the same time, explore many career options. Of course, there's a traditional university route. There's some high schools. But don't forget there's private industry as well. There's some private companies that do a really good job of strength conditioning. There's also some that do a terrible job. Maybe you walk in and make that job better. Sometimes private is a little bit better. It's a little bit more 9 to 5 or at least 40-hour a week compared to universities, which are 70 or 80 hours a week. So look at different career paths. Look at military. Look at special ops, SWAT teams, paramedics, first responders. There's all kinds of different avenues you could go with it. And then also clubs, sports clubs. And then everybody wants the pro team, right? Well, the pro team's not always the best gig. Some pro teams are pretty cool gigs for sure, but they're not always the best ones. But there's a few out there as well. So look at all these different career options and figure out which one appeals to you most. And spend time in each of those different fields. Develop expertise working with all ranges of ages and ability. And then create your career plan. Okay, this year, this is what I'm going to do. Next year, I'm going to move on to something new, which will build me in a vertical direction towards what I ultimately want. I want to be a head strength conditioning coach at a university. I want to be a director of human performance for a sports institute, whatever it may be. And then set up your plan so that you can get there. During that time, you build your career capital. So that's part of your learning path. So your resume, what are the things on your resume that catch people's eye? Where did you go? Who did you learn from? What extra academics or other curriculum have you taken? What references can you bring to the table? All of that, everything you can add to a resume builds that career capital and makes you more valuable than someone else. And then, I hate to say it, but always have a plan B. In this industry, you have to have another option. What's your escape plan? You're working towards becoming a university strength coach and you're 10 years in and you still haven't got that job. Now you're married and you have children, you have a mortgage, and you're still making $45,000 a year, working 60 hours a week and 6 a.m. till 9 p.m. at night. So you got to start thinking, okay, what's my escape plan? Some people go into teaching, some people go into more the business side of things, some people move from academic to private. That's got to be your plan B. You got to be thinking through that because this is a tough job for some people to do into their 50s and 60s. And ultimately, any career you choose, if you have a family, you have to be able to plan for that kind of thing. So there we go, folks. So you want to be a strength coach? That's a lot of advice there to think about before you dive into this industry. But hopefully that's helpful. It gives you some things to think about. And this is Dr. Trevor Cottrell signing off. I'll see you in the gym.